Okay, so I gave you all the problems in the region, and now we will move to one of the discussed solution. So one of the discussed solutions is weapon of mass destruction free, weapon of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. So this is an idea that is not new. It has been already discussed in 1974. It's the idea that first formalized by Iran and then Egypt sponsored it in the UN. And the idea is really to free the region. The idea of nuclear weapon free zone is to free a specific geographical region from the presence of nuclear weapons. And this is the idea that happened already, that we see it other places around the globe. Actually, most of the southern hemisphere is a nuclear weapon free zone already by different countries. So each region you see here, each region negotiated by themselves on that. And then there are several countries that, like Mongolia here, that declare on themselves, that declare on themselves as a nuclear weapon free country. And the idea with those, the basic obligation of nuclear weapon free zones are the guarantee of total absence of nuclear weapons and prohibition on development, possession, and testing of nuclear weapons in that geographical area. So as we say, there are many of them. But the problem in the Middle East, obviously, as we spoke about, is that you cannot address only nuclear. And there are problems also related to chemical weapon use and development. So what practically happened after the discovery in Iraq, that Iraq developed all those kinds of chemical weapons, or the program is that Hosni Mubarak of Egypt came with in the 1990s with what we call the Mubarak Initiative, which is said, we cannot really look only on nuclear, we need to really look on all the weapon of mass destruction. And he, practically it was the expansion of the idea from only nuclear to all weapon of mass destruction. But so far, there is no progress whatsoever about the topic. There is almost, I would say, asymmetrical issues, but also opposing views of what this weapon of mass destruction should do, what are the objectives and how it should be implemented. So and the disagreements are between Israel to the Arab countries. So practically with regard to the objectives, the Arab states' objective is equity. What they say is equal security for all. And the idea to achieve that is that Israel needs to sign the NPT, as all of us Arab countries, and as a non-nuclear weapon state. And what they said is that once Israel does not have nuclear weapons, then all of us will be safe and secure. Israel, on the other hand, said is that this region is insecure for us. What we need is regional peace and security, which part of it is integration and legitimacy, and only then we will feel secure and safe to disarm. So you really see opposite objectives of what each side wants to achieve in that process. Egypt, or Arab state, but mainly Egypt, want Israel to disarm first, and then by that practically they feel that will achieve what the objectives are. Israel say, until we feel secure and safe, we're not going to even discuss disarmament. So this is about the objective. Then about the sequencing, and that's practically the same thing, is like what Israel wants to see is a gradual negotiation about peace and step-by-step approach and confidence building measures to make sure that we feel that we are safe, and then speak about conventional and non-conventional arms control and disarmament. So practically this is coming almost towards the end, while the Egyptians are saying, not only Egyptians, Arabs and Iran said that Israel's position is practically to postpone forever getting real progress here. But recently, the Iran nuclear program, as it developed, really scared some of the Arab countries, especially the GCC countries, that really start thinking that actually it's in their interest as well to start speaking about both conventional as well as non-conventional, as well as how to get Iran more contained in the region. So that's complicated a little bit the Arab League position that right now is divided between, on one end, Egypt, and the other one, some of the GCC countries. And then the last sticking point is verification. On one end, Israel sees very intrusive verification, comprehensive verification that with a dedicated international organization that goes much further from all the existing international mandates, because they say they don't work in the region, it's being violated, while some of the other countries see that like we can use whatever there is right now, there is no need for additional measures. And if there is, we can get them, but it's not, the main thing is really, we can use what there is exists right now. So this is where things have been stuck, and we have not progressed since then. Just last week, there was a conference in New York that for the first time, most of the regional countries were there, or actually all countries in the region beside of Israel, and also all the P5 beside of the US were there to discuss the zone. Both Israel and the US have not gone there or refused to join the negotiations or the conference. It didn't start negotiating, just a conference with the assertion that the way that the rules of procedures, which mean will it be by consensus or not, really put Israel in a position that they will always have to oppose the decision. They have, the Arabs have automatic majority, and they will not be able to get any agreement unless they break consensus, and then they will be always isolated. So this is where we are right now with solutions. I think we're done, and probably a little bit more than what I was supposed to do.
Thank you so much, Chen. It was really comprehensive and insightful lecture. I just wanted to have some, maybe a few discussion questions, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
So, yeah, when I talk to like high school students or general public, I believe many people have lots of misunderstanding about the Middle East. And the other day when I was talking to high school students and just asked how many, do you know which countries have nuclear weapons? And many students believe that Iran already possess nuclear weapons. That's like a kind of a misunderstanding. So I want to first start with two big countries, Iran and Israel. And obviously these two countries have a very, very difficult relationship, to say the least. So first, maybe you could share a little bit more about insights, the relationship between Iran and Israel, and if there is any possibility that these two countries have, to some extent, the relationship is going to improve.
So the relationship between Israel and Iran actually are really interesting, because before the revolution in Iran, the relationship were really good. Actually, Israel was one of the few countries in the world that supported Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, which was interesting. But with the revolution in Iran and the current regime that is more religion based, and also position themselves as opposing the great Satan, which is the US, and the small Satan, which is Israel, those relationships extremely deteriorated. But what I would say is that the change is not, the change in relationship is not because of long-term hate between the two nations, because it was not. Until the 70s, they actually get along really well, including Israelis living in Iran and teaching in Iran. And there is big Iranian community in Israel, of Iranian Jewish population. So the relationship is not based on sort of inherent hate, which I would say some of the other Israelis and some of the other Arab wars is, because the education was much more, and they fought war against each other, while Israel and Iran never fought a war against each other directly. So the hate and mistrust is not inherent. I would say it's really based on regime, and which can change, but obviously the current regime is not going anywhere unless it's collapsed economically suddenly, which I don't see anytime soon. So the question is how those two countries can manage their relationship and avoid really clashes. And the clashes right now actually are happening by proxy because of Iran interest in Syria. They actually are based, there are Iranian troops and Iranian advisor in Syria, which is just to the north of Israel. And that's where Israel really concerned about in Syria, is that Iran suddenly came so close to them physically. And that's where the main danger is that they might have some clashes, military clashes, that is not directly Israel and Iran in their territory, but through Syria, or sometimes it happens with Hezbollah in Lebanon. So this is really the complicated factors. Like otherwise, they are really distant. The geographical distance is relatively very big. The dangers that they will fight a war against each other is relatively very small. But right now, because of the situation that there is Iranian presence in Syria, that make the clashes more dangerous. But also both sides have really practically been using Russia to manage and to de-escalate. So Russia is responsible to be in contact both with the Syrian regime as well as the Iranian and the Israelis about deconflicting. And that's what they've been doing for the last 2-3 years, is deconflicting between all those that have various interests in Syria.
Thank you very much. So now I would also like to ask you about the issue of a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. And after Trump withdrew, the United States withdrew from the JCPOA, there are some also misunderstanding that Iran is going to nuclear, but based on your very detailed explanation, that's not the case. Now, I'm also wondering other countries' reaction to Iran's restart of enrichment of uranium. So maybe you could talk a little bit about current status of JCPOA and other like EU and Russian reactions to Iran's restart of enrichment of uranium, because there are lots of concerns over this issue. So could you please explain a little bit about this?
Yeah. So Iranian purpose have been taking very small, gradual steps. They're really taking those steps with the sort of the notion is that we want you to stop us, but in order to stop us, we need to change the economic situation, and we need you, Europe, to start compensate for the sanctions and the economic sanctions that we lost because of the US sanctions. So they really sort of screaming, those steps are reversible. We are willing, we don't want to take them. We want to be stopped, but in order to stop us, you need to give us those economic compensation. The Europeans so far has not managed to get that economic benefits back to Iran. And you saw the riots that were in Iran in the last couple of weeks, but also before, and the government really felt threatened by them, and they really are serious because the economic situation in Iran, both because of sanctions, but not only because of sanctions, also a lot of mismanagement of the economy, is serious. Russia has been relatively, they obviously criticize the US, but they don't really, I don't know if they don't have the ability, or because they are under sanctions as well, because of Ukraine, to really compensate Iran on some levels on the economic part. But what we see so far is that the steps that Iran took are very measured. What we will start to be really worried about is if Iran takes steps, for example, of enriching up to 20%. This is a very provocative step that probably will create snapback sanctions by the Europeans. Or, for example, stop cooperating with the IAEA on some of the verification. So if we see those steps, we know that we are really on the verge of collapse of complete collapse of the JCPOA. In a big term of like the future of the JCPOA, we have 3 basic scenarios. First one is, or under Trump, or if there is a different president in the US, is practically renegotiating a new agreement. And such an agreement can be based on the JCPOA, but also will have to include other provisions like the missiles, like Iran regional behavior. So this is like one optional scenario. Another optional scenario is what we call JCPOA point 2. So practically, and it can be with or without the US, depends again who is in the White House after the next election. And that is practically fixing some of the aspects of the JCPOA, but not really but it's still going to be mainly the nuclear ones, maybe a little bit of the missiles, but it's not going to cover all the 12 points that Pompeo envisioned in his speech. And then the third scenario is just a collapse of the JCPOA, which if we continue the road that we are going now, is one of the more probable options. One of the other complicated aspects is that the US elections are happening in November, but there will not be a new president until January 2021. And then you have, January, yeah, 2021. And then within less than 9 months, I think less than 6 months, you have Iranian elections of presidency. So even if you have a really positive presidents in the US that are willing to negotiate with Iran, they're starting a presidential campaign when our president will just start his office. So they will not be able to negotiate really or get to an agreement during that time, because nobody is going to get to an agreement just before they leave in office. So it's really complicated also time-wise, but that's mean that for the next year and a half, there is no prospects for negotiation unless Trump is going to manage to get back Iran to negotiation table. And obviously Iran is very suspicious of the US and why one day and why they will agree to something and the next president will go away from that as well.
I see. Okay, so this is not just a Trump's problem, although the main reason.
It's all of us problem because if Iran...
Yeah, but many people were hoping, I mean, not all of them, but among the non-proliferation arms control community, most of people are supporting this JCPOA. So if United States select a different president who is more like, understanding the importance of arms control, perhaps that things may be going in a positive direction. But as you said, there is an Iranian election, so looks like it's very difficult to have some good prospect. That's the kind of current situation.
Right, and also I want to make sure that people don't have illusion that there is a way back to go back to the JCPOA. The JCPOA currently is not what it was about 3 years ago. And even if there is a new democratic president, he will not be able to go back to what was 4 years ago. They will have to really renegotiate some of those terms because the JCPOA as it was does not exist anymore. And the situation changed both in the region and in Iran and in the US, and the trust obviously changed. So even if there is a decision to go back to JCPOA, it's not the JCPOA that was 4 years ago. It will be JCPOA with some adjustment. And obviously everyone will have to agree to those adjustments. And that will be very difficult.
Okay, thank you. So I'm trying to find some positive solution. Sorry, this is
the list is hard to find positive.
Very hard, but still, for the purpose of this critical issues forum, the high school students education project, this year's theme is toward a world free of nuclear weapons, the role of youth as change agents. So this really brings me to the next question, the next generation. So I understand that you manage, you direct the Middle East Next Generation Arms Control Program, if I understand correctly. could you please share that initiative because it's so important? Also, if you could give some, I know it's very difficult to have some positive solution, but if you see any scenario that Middle East is going to be WMD free, what kind of a scenario you could envision? Sorry, this is not a good
Let me
question.
try the easier part first. So for
Please.
MINAX, which is the Middle East Next Generation Arms Control Specialist Network, I established it in 2012, and the idea was, it was around the same time of the Arab uprisings in the Middle East, and the idea was really that young people did take more control or try to take more control about their future. And one of the other part of that was they really tried to influence policy and political decisions that beforehand they really tried to stay away because of they did not like the regimes, or they consider them corrupt, or they didn't really let them go because it was very close knit of people, only elite or only people from specific families. So the Arab uprising was, for me at least, sort of a show of attempt of young people from the region really to sort of break those blocks and the glass ceiling of not being able to be involved in their future, and really to be able to try to influence that. So we created this network of young people from the region, and there are more than, by now, I guess, more than 30 of them. And it's open for anyone in the region. It's unique in many ways because they are meeting for at least 3-4 times a year physically. We meet in different places around the globe, and we work around projects, because one of my ideas, beside of the fact that it is practically unique in the sense that you bring Iranians and Israelis and Arabs together and they speak with each other, which if you look on the older generation, you had all those constraints that those people put on themselves. Like, oh, we cannot speak with this, and because they're that, and because until there is a UN flag, we cannot speak with each other. So those young people don't have those constraints. They don't believe in those constraints. They think they're silly, and they are speaking with each other, and they are trying to make their own communities as well as the region better. There are risks with those, and those are things that those young people are willing to take, but those are can be dangerous because, as I mentioned, some of those countries are not allowed to speak with the other countries, and those are the law, and they are violating their own national law in order to try to make the region and their own country better. But it's a risk. But they are willing, and they have been publishing articles together. I have, for example, in the heights of the Iranian and Israeli rhetoric, and I think it was 2016, I can't remember the year, an Israeli and Iranian wrote together an article in an Israeli newspaper calling both their countries' leaders to reduce all the public propaganda and really look on their country's national interest and really try to resolve the animosity between the two countries. And there are other articles that this group wrote together, as well as a project that they have been working on together. And I'm always hopeful and impressed when I see them and when I meet them, and they are our future, and that's my hope.
Okay, thank you. So finally, like when Israelis always believe like security should come first before the disarmament, it's a kind of a very, as you explained, this objective, each party's objective is very different. So it's very obvious establishing a WMD-free zone in the Middle East is extremely difficult. But is there any way that you can find a solution to move forward this direction?
The answer is yes, but just countries need to behave in a more mature way than what they have been in the last 40 years. They have been really sticking to their declared positions and not willing to compromise on anything. And that really was detrimental to the process. And also states from both sides need to recognize that the other sides have legitimate concerns and need to address, and that their obligation is to address those concerns. Otherwise, we will not progress. If the only legitimate concern is your own, you will continue to what we have been doing. But it's a process that right now countries in the region are not willing to make those steps. But we know what will be the end product. The question how we get there, and it's very clear, and it's not very complicated, the end product, or it can be complicated on the technical level, but not on the political level. But there is no decision by, and I would say here it's 3 countries that need to make those decisions and have not made it. It's Israel, Iran, and Egypt. They need to start changing their way that they're thinking about their security and really start thinking about what the other side is saying about their own security and how that can be improved in order to create more security for themselves. Because as long as each of those countries are more pursuing security for only for national needs, there is not going to be a progress. And each of them so far, if you speak with them, made actually a conscious decision that their status quo now for them is better off than the zone. None of them made the commitment that they would be better off if the zone will exist. And until that happens, we're not going to progress.
Okay, thank you so much. So there are so many things that we have to study, and it's very rich and difficult topics, but your lecture really helps us to understand the situation and the history and some future prospects of the Middle East WMD issues. So I really like to thank you, Chen, and thank you so much for watching this video. And so we continue to study this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Masako.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.